Meissner. I'm the founder of Plan Compliance, which is a platform on financial innovation and regulation. We help RegTech and Fin&Tech firms with their tiny problems that they encounter during their journey. I'd like to say 2 words about each of you, and then we'll open up for the panel. So next to me I have Emir. Emir is a graduate from Birkbeck in London. He's here as a sales consultant for Comply Advantage. He has before that been with Thomson Reuters and Gartner. Next to him we have Johan from Flare Systems. Johan joins us from Canada. He's the co-founder of the Montreal-based cybersecurity startup, working with financial institutions and directly involved in projects with various Canadian banks. Flare Systems helps banks bridge, and correct me if I got that wrong, the gap between cybersecurity, fraud and AML. And he's in charge of the product development as well as the European expansion. So we're going to hear something very interesting about that in a second. At the far end, we have Antoine from Shoyo, graduate, at the far end over there. Graduate from EPFL in Lausanne and HEC Paris Business School. He's a partner at Shoyo and Happy Capital. He's also the co-founder of Shoyo, which is a spin-off of the Happy Capital crowdfunding site, and that all came about because of the impact of regulations and the problem they were encountering with those. And then last but not least, we have Louis from the AMF, the French regulator in Paris, studied at École Supérieure d'Ingénieurs Leonardo da Vinci and in Beijing. He has worked on blockchain and distributed ledger technology with the Banque de France and the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So he's going to be able to give us an insight how are things in Asia as well. And because it's always great to have someone from the regulator in the house, I would like to start with him. He is part of the FinTech Innovation Competitiveness Division at the AMF, right? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing there.
Well, thank you for your question. So, first of all, we are the innovation in we are the FinTech team at the AMF. And our work is to follow and to help any actors who want to come to the AMF for consult and advice about their projects. So it can be RegTech, but it can be also SubTech, or it can be also any kind of FinTech. So this is one part of the work. And also we are here to promote regulation on the European and international platforms. And we also worked a lot this last year on cryptoactive, and so we published with the PAC law a new framework, a new regulatory framework. So I wasn't here on the last panel about blockchain, but the new regulatory framework will allow people to do some crypto ICOs, or initial coin offering, and also to offer services on cryptoactive. So basically that's the work we did for the last year.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, very exciting. You mentioned you help firms with any questions on regulation, and maybe that leads us to Antoine, because as I said, like, regulation actually started you to start a new business.
Yeah, good evening everyone. I'm pleased to be next to the AMF because we are under your umbrella in a way. So we created a tool that, like said Jim at the opening of the summit, is used to reduce the friction of the customer. This is a tool that smooths the constraints that our regulator imposes, like the KYC constraint. As you probably know, you have to know your customer as a financial actor, and we are a financial actor as part of our activity of the crowdfunding. So we took awareness of the fact that during the internet journey of our customer, there were a collapse of investment, and the customer gave up, in fact, because of the KYC and the length of the questionnaires he has to answer. So this is totally normal, and I say that not because you're here, Louis, but because I really think this. You have to avoid money laundering, but you also have to protect the investors. And those questions are not only to know the customer, but also to know if what he invests is in correspondence with his wealth, in fact.
And we are going to explore that aspect of the relationship between companies like yours and the regulator in a second.
Yeah. So just, Johan, to finish,
sure.
The tool is called Shoyo, and this is what is written on your bag, by the way. And this tool aims at smoothing the constraint by creating a digital identity, a financial digital identity, that is used to make only one time your KYC, you as a customer, as an investor, and then you can reuse this identity to reinvest in any kind of product, financial product. So here we are typically in initiative around frictionless, and we are typically facilitating onboarding for financial actors that have to sell financial product, but this totally in accordance with the regulator, which is IMF in France. And to finish, we also have to prevent our customer to give too much data, which can also be a topic about GDPR. So our tool gives only the needed data to subscribe. And this is very important today, as we have seen different problems with Facebook and so on. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Anton. As I said, we are focusing on the relationship between the two of you, and I think Johan has a very unique perspective on that, because obviously he's involved with the Canadian regulator and he's now got insights how things working in Europe.
Yeah, thanks, Jochen. So I think a very interesting thing about Europe and Canada is that we see kind of a wave, right? That starts a lot in Europe and in France with regulation, and that eventually goes to Canada and then the US, right? And Canada is typically in between the two. And so at the moment, on our side of things, on the startup sides, it's really what will be the next step for Canadian and Quebec regulators. And there's a good chance that it's concerning data privacy, right? So GDPR related laws. So we don't have GDPR in Canada. We have some very lower standards. So there are some laws there, but we expect that GDPR will come at some point. But there might be also other regulations, also on the blockchain and the ICO side. This is getting a lot more structured in Europe, and it's still slowly making its way in Canada. So for startups involved in that field, they're looking on this side of the ocean to try to figure out what's the next step and how do you prepare for that. Because as a startup, if you're not taking that into account and you're building a product and then the regulation hits you, I mean, it can finish there, right? You need to be ready for that.
Yeah. Very good. That's actually an excellent point. Emir here, as I said, is a sales consultant on AML, a product for Comply Advantage, and he looks after France and Southern Europe. Maybe you can briefly tell us why that is so attractive at the moment.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, Emir from Comply Advantage. So I'm based in London, and one of the main reasons I was approached by our CEO, Charlie Delling-Paul, earlier this year was that we recognize at Comply Advantage the importance of sort of how fast a customer gets onboarded, whether it's with a new card or with a bank account. But at the same time, we know that some countries like France have pretty I wouldn't say rigid, but like they have regulations that are that need to be respected, obviously, by all the customers. So it's about finding that balance between the customer sort of happiness and also being fully regulated and fully, in line with the new regulations. So I think that's what we do at Comply Advantage, is to sort of bridge that gap between the customers and the regulators, because we do recognize that both sides are really important. And sort of to answer the question of the actual panel, I think that the customers do drive that need for innovation, but the regulators are almost like that trinity of divisions of power, like they're there to make sure that the rules are being respected, and eventually that the end user is being protected.
Excellent. On that point, do you have any insights? I know if you joined Compliant Advantage very recently, but you've been with Thomson Reuters and you've been with Gartner. Do you see any difference in approach between, like, say, the British authorities and here in France?
I think they have pretty similar approaches in a way that they recognize that both the UK and France are, technology-driven countries, and innovation is really important in both countries. So, but at the same time, I think that there's as much investment in sort of legal teams as well as in innovation. So I think that I'm not sure really about the differences. Maybe our partner from AMF can tell us a bit more about this, but I know that there's loads of similarities, and that's mainly due to the fact that both those countries are technology driven, and at the same time they're well structured when it comes to regulations and the protection of the end user.
So maybe I have a difference, but it has not to do with the regulators, rather with the government. By the way, the government, in a way, is the pre-regulator. He creates the rules on you do also, Louis, but I mean, you have to make this rule being respected. I'm sorry for the reduction of your work, but okay. First, government has something to say, so in a way, he's a regulator. So to take the example of British versus French, if we take, for instance, Libra, the governor of the England Bank said we stay open mind, but this is not an open door, whereas the Prime Minister or the Minister of Finance in France said no way in French soil. So this demonstrates a different way to anticipate something, which is, by the way, not yet operating.
Yeah, and I just want to say, in France, we don't regulate RegTech. We just can apply on a regulated financial institution. So the fact is, the only actor driving. I don't know what you think about in England, but it's quite the same. It's just that you have more actors, so you are more fintechs. You are more RegTechs. That's the point, and it's also, as you say, we just a pro law. We contribute, and I join you, but we cannot help RegTech because they come to us and they ask us sometimes, can you give us a label, or maybe you can do some communication or joint communication to say that we came to the AMF and we are very compliant, so it can boost the sectors, and we can't, but we are working closely with the RegTech to find ways to boost the innovation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think you make a very good point there when you say you don't regulate RegTechs as such. Is fintech firms that you regulate, or financial institutions in general, but still there is some kind of perception, at least when you speak to people in the industry, that there is a different level, different speed of adoption between actors like the FCA in the UK and France and Germany as well, and Italy is pretty much non-existent, and then you have the AMS in Singapore as well. What's the issue there?
Well, just for the Singapore fintech environment is very different. So I think it's hard to compare Singapore to the European area. In fact, there are more people, and there are also a marketing department only to boost the fintech economy in Singapore. So we don't have this marketing team, to just promote RegTech environment. So I think this is I think the first difference is here is we welcome RegTech for advice and to talk about them, to talk about the project. But when they step out from the AMF, they are nothing from us, But we are working with the ACPR and other institutions to see how we can maybe work on the KYC AML, or how we can work on other, like pain point, like we can allow RegTech to be more efficient, and also how we display public data, and how they can just, work with us to be more efficient. But on the promotion side, I think it's very different. The approach is different.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. I think so. I think that's great. We haven't seen. Maybe there are some opportunities, but I wouldn't say the regulators in Canada are very involved in the startup ecosystem. And from what I've seen is that startups sometimes identify pain points or points where consumers, where end users might be targeted faster than the regulator or the government could, because it's their lifeline, right? They have to figure out their business. They have to figure out how to help their clients and the end user. So I think that by having regulators that are very open to receiving pain points in ways they can help protect the public, can really help in the end. And I'm saying this a bit from personal experience, because we find on dark web, on criminal networks, we find locations where consumers, where citizens are clearly targeted, and we feel like we would be able to help them if we were able to discuss openly through a regulator and bring this to kind of help the banks go in the right direction in this way.
So we say like further collaboration is like the key aspect you would expect from the regulators, that what you would ask for in the circumstances.
Yeah, I think so, because those pain points are identified already, and they have to be brought out. And if startups start and die, right, and maybe they identify a real danger to the citizens, which is why the regulation is there, right? So that point needs to go up and end up be applied at a government level.
Yeah.
Well, I totally agree with you on the collaboration between RegTech that can identify a pain point on the regulator. To answer your question, one of the whole regulator is speeder than the other, and it's called FINMA. In Switzerland, the regulator often adopts some regulations about, for instance, security token offering, and now Libra again, earlier than the other. This might be due to cultural existence of Switzerland, I don't know, but FINMA is one of the most efficient in terms of delay to regulate. And this has to be underlined, I think.
I think from a Canadian point of view, the great side of having tighter regulation is Europe. It does make things harder for startup, but it makes regulators more open, right? Because the structure is there, and it's impossible to drive innovation through startups if there's no communication. So although I think I'm in a way lucky that we have lower regulation levels to build a company as a founder, but it's great here that the collaboration is already in progress.
So one very useful instrument, at least I think of it as such, are regulatory sandboxes or innovation hubs to strengthen the collaboration between companies, or the dialogue between companies and the regulators or the authorities in general. It's like, love to hear the view both from someone from the regulator here in France, as well as the companies and what their experiences are.
Your question is about sandbox.
Different kinds. It's like, obviously there are regulatory sandboxes with a confined space where you can test out your things, or it's like innovation hubs or tech sprints.
That
different forms.
That's two parts. I think the first one is about sandbox. We don't have sandbox as the buzzword can be, because it's hard to put a definition on sandbox. Sometimes you have different definitions. We do not have sandbox in France, but as I said, we are really excited to see how the innovation goes up, and if we can advise, and if we can see the actors and maybe listen to the pain points, so we can maybe gather all the pain points and maybe focus on them on a higher level, so we can unlock these problematics. We are here, so in a way it's kind of sandbox in the way that we follow our actors. Also, we are also thinking about tech sprints and collaboration, and we are working. So that's why we need also input from RegTech to see what is possible, and so we can work with the ACPR or other institution to see if there is a common work we can do together.
I have nothing to add to that, except that we will be more than happy to participate in workshop around KYC and to give you our feedback on the way we can facilitate the respect of the rules. It's a kind of sandbox, an oral sandbox then.
Agreed.
Me.
Agreed, both of you.
Excellent. And another way, and that is obviously closely related to regulation as such, as an instrument that works as well as an open standards. And I think we have our ideas who should lead with regard to regulations, but open standards as an instrument to develop a platform from where to start. Who should take the lead there? Is it the regulator? Is it the financial institutions? Is it the regulatory technology firms? What do you think, Johan?
I think the first version of this kind of sandbox, and maybe this is why you haven't moved forward, is kind of how do you define it, right? And who do you build it for? You have a variety of fintechs, in different fields, in investment, so we're in security, in trading. So how can you build a sandbox that fits with all these types of fintechs? So I think it might be a case for some kind of study to figure out where the need is the most and where it could help the most. I would expect that some of these fintechs encounter the same pain points that could be solved by a single sandbox, but I think it's tricky to think of doing a sandbox and to solve the regulation problem, right, in one shot or in a few months.
From the view of RegTech companies like yours, or Antoine and Amy will be able to talk about that as well. It's like, what are like the biggest obstacles you face on your journey to establish yourself as a player in the field?
So it would be I think, as I said, as a Canadian company, kind of the uncertainty of where it is going. Because right now we know what we have to do on a cybersecurity side and on a privacy side to be compliant, right? And the banks help us. I mean, the banks tell us what we need to do. We're a young startup, but we're already working with multiple large banks, so we've quickly become compliant for their sourcing process. But the question is, where is it going, and how can we prepare for that? So I think GDPR was a good example. We kind of face the risk of not being able to overcome this. One way we're trying to figure all this out is seeing some of our competitors are present in Europe, and so we're looking at how they are doing it and how they work with regulation. I'm thinking a lot of GDPR because we collect data we crawl data, right, on illicit networks, on the dark web, and we very often find personal data, right? We'll crawl a phone number and it's there, and it doesn't mean it's a criminal. We have no idea who it is, but it's there. So it's an issue of figuring out the whole privacy in a large data collection system.
Antoine?
So one of the pain points we have, again, it's the length of the questionnaires that we have to make fill our customer. And we totally understand this is needed, but the consequence is that we have some customer in France that give up, in fact, in terms of investment. In France, we are not really in a country where investors take risks. They prefer to store data and their value in low-rate products. And when you find a client, a customer that is interested in investing, it's a pity that he finally give up because of the EV character of the questionnaire they have to fill. So this is typically why we imagine, because we were obliged to, the technology like Shoyo, that is really a kind of revolution in terms of pain point for actors like us. But if you take, for instance, our host, Montaigne Patrimoine, they certainly have the same problem with those questionnaires. And again, Louis, I'm not complaining. I'm just really taking a photo of the situation. And rather than, having 1 hour to fill the questionnaire, they better focus on advising and giving good advice relatively to the wealth of the customer, relatively to his choice to invest in this product which is risky, this one which is less risky, and so on. And really, this pain point, I think we found a workaround, and this is I think the role of the RegTech also, to find a way to exist, whereas there are some needed constraints, and to find solutions to live with them.
Excellent. I think that's a very good point. And Louis has already given me the signal. Do we have time for a question? Maybe?
Yes, just in one word, and 1, 2, 3, whether you have 1 minute, it will be the elevator pitch. So, in an elevator conclusion about regulation, about painless onboarding, I think painless onboarding is one of the most important topic you spoke about. Your conclusion in some words from each part of the... For the painless onboarding, I think it's the most important for me and for us. Just in some words, what do you want to conclude? How do you want to conclude?
So to answer the question, who leads? Sometimes the regulator, sometimes the financial actor. Depends. As you said, Johan, the financial actor can lead because he take before the regulator the leads in terms of innovation. And sometimes the regulator at the end leads because he imposes the rules for the good of the investor.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it's a two-part progress, right? The fintechs can be there very early to identify the pain points, but obviously once the fintechs can't lead the structuring of the regulation, they can only identify starting points. So I think at that point it's the regulator's role to really structure what is going to be put in place to help the end users.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you, but I think it's just the start of the journey because RegTech is new, and I think for now it's more actor-driven because we can just regulate, financial institution or the one who is under us, but we cannot regulate RegTech. So for now it's just actors. But with the work we are doing, and I think in the future we will have more close relationship, and in order to boost all this sector.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think that's at the end of the day, the fintech want to help the end users, and at the same time, the regulators want to make sure that the end user is being protected, and sort of the RegTech is sitting in between. So I think that the end users are leading every innovation change, but the regulators still need to have a big role into that process by being as transparent as possible with the RegTechs when it comes to regulations, especially specific regulation to a given country or a given region. But I think, as you said, it's just the beginning of the journey. It's something completely new, and when new technology comes out, it's a bit surprising in the beginning, but people get used to it very quickly. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Emir. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for this very insightful conversation. And thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.